Hello and welcome to episode 74 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Geof Bradfield, a saxophonist, composer, arranger, and educator based in Chicago, Illinois. Appearing on more than 50 albums, Geof's expeditions as a bandleader have led to critical accolades from the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Downbeat, the Chicago Tribune, and NPR. This episode was part of Bandstand Presents' ongoing series, The Residency, that facilitates community between the Austin, Chicago, and New York scenes through collaborative shows with the Christian Wiggs Big Band, the staple Monday Night Jam at the Elephant Room, educational engagements at Texas State University, and episodes of Off the Bandstand. In this episode, we chat about diving into the scores of an unsung hero of jazz. We also chat about the significance of symmetry in Geof's writing, and a nightmare cocktail that consists of a milking truck, a European tour, and an inescapable glass shower. Moving on to our featured release this week, this is Yes and, music for Nine Improvisers, Geof's debut album on Delmark Records that released in 2018. The project features an extended suite constructed in the spirit of the legendary improvisational cabaret revue, The Compass Players, one of the nation's first improv theater groups who were founded in Chicago in 1955. If you want to support this release directly, you can head over to geofbradfield.bandcamp.com, and for all things Geof, all the time, you can follow him on Instagram at geofbrad. On the calendar for Bandstand Presents, we couldn't be more excited that Brian Carter's Jazz at Pride is returning to the stage not once, but twice for the 2022 Pride season. The first show will be on Monday, June 27th at the famed Dizzy's Club at Jazz at Lincoln Center in New York City, with two sets at 7:30 and 9:30 p.m., with a second date right here in Austin, Texas on Thursday, August 11th at Skybox on 6th Street. For more information, you can head over to bandstandpresents.com, and for all things Bandstand all the time, you can follow us on Instagram at Bandstand Presents. That is it for all of the mentions and announcements this week. Let's dive into episode 74, Geof Bradfield. This is Off the Bandstand. Man, also, where'd you get the pants?
The pants are just like J. Crew or something.
J. Crew? Yeah. J. Crew or something. Oh, man, no, J. Crew stands on its own. Yeah. It's like, no, it was J. Crew.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't remember. Yeah.
Right. We're trying to get
the socks are from the Alma Thomas exhibit in D.C.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Which my wife wrote the catalog for.
Did she really?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. What does your wife do?
She's an art historian.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah.
How does that then cross over into your work, if at all?
We used to teach at Washington State. We taught a class in like 20th century art and music together, briefly.
Yeah.
So sometimes there's a direct crossover. She works on an artist called Archibald Motley. She's kind of the most renowned scholar on him, and he's like the Chicago equivalent of like an Aaron Douglas or Romar Bearden.
Okay.
That period. Jazz age, Bronzeville in Chicago, a lot of jazz images. You've seen them because they're on the cover of a lot of record albums.
Sure.
Things like that, like Ramsey Lewis records and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's some crossover there, and she produced like, helped to curate a show of his a while ago that then she hired musicians for.
Yeah.
So, I recommended people. I didn't do it because of the nepotism involved. But
sure.
Just like got Marquis on it and some other folks. So there's occasionally a little crossover.
Yeah. You could have gone by a pseudonym, though.
Yeah,
and nobody would have ever.
Well, and later,
noticed
of course, one of our friends who produces all the time is like, "Why didn't you do it? It just makes total sense. It's what you do." But I was like, it seemed weird.
Totally. How much of your work, like in either planned projects or things that you have taken on in the past, how much do you like to do cross collaboration between the different mediums of art to kind of like raise up all of the fine arts?
I like it when it can happen. It can. There's always something. You're going to learn something in that process.
Sure.
Whatever you thought you were going to do, it is not going to be exactly what happens.
Right.
So, I think a couple of the ones I've done in the past, I was the artist in residence of the Hyde Park Jazz Festival through Chamber Music America. Maybe the first and only time the Hyde Park Jazz Festival had an artist in residence.
Sure.
It's many, many years ago. And as part of it, we worked with, I had a record at the time called African Flowers.
Yeah.
And the Hyde Park School of Ballet choreographed some things to it, and we did a performance with them.
Yeah.
Where we were essentially backing them up. We're kind of their pit orchestra in the back,
Sure.
but we're, it's improvised music, so it's variable in length, and so we have to kind of reach some agreement as to like, well, how long is this piece? When are the events that trigger the dance things? It's really very interesting working with them, and they weren't African dancers, they weren't modern dancers. I mean, they were ballet dancers.
Yeah.
So the choreography they're working with is from that idiom.
Sure.
But it was fascinating.
Oh man, that's amazing. You mentioned Chamber Music America, and I know that you do a lot of work like commission, where it's either commission or grant, right? Grant.
Yeah, there's sort of these the things I've done. I've done a few different things with them. That residency, and then I've received the New Works grant a few times, which sets up a path where you write some music, you rehearse the music, you perform it twice, and then in later years they started to add money for recording, touring, post-production money. It's really fantastic, funded by Doris Duke, and is one of the few things like that that really targets the jazz musician accurately as a composer-performer, rather than putting you in the pool where you're competing with a bunch of classical composers who are likely not the performers of their work, and whose work is largely written, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily mixed with improvisation. And the great thing about that particular program of CMA, the New Jazz Works program, is it's explicitly for jazz musicians.
Yeah.
And so you're not navigating the sea of, well, this is not exactly what I do.
Sure. Man, that is so interesting too. I also kind of pick up on a lot of those elements because whenever I'm listening to your writing, whether it's on, Melba or it's general semantics or, African flower, all these different things, it feels like there are contemporary elements, there are bebop elements, but there's also, other more classical, like what we would kind of consider to be almost like chamber elements as well in your writing. How much of that do you like to kind of pull from in terms of inspiration? Like, where do you go for each project?
Yeah, I mean, I work best if I have, whether it's just one tune or it's, a 60-minute multi-movement piece.
Sure.
I work best if I have some sort of external starting point.
Yeah.
And it can be something very simple. It could be one measure of music from a Debussy prelude, or it could be something less musically specific, like with Melba Liston, it was both things. It was, well, here's this particular arc of her life that I thought made a good story. Not her whole life, but just this particular arc of being born in Kansas City and moving to LA as a young kid, going to middle school with Dexter Gordon and having her first musical experiences there, cutting her teeth with Gerald Wilson and other folks. Then the connection with Dizzy Gillespie, then with Randy Weston, leaving for Jamaica, and then returning triumphantly to the Kansas City Women's Jazz Fest. Like it makes this kind of beginning to end arc. So in that I was looking for like, well, how do you tell that story musically? And what would each movement of that feel like, what each moment? So then that allows me an in where I was like, well, okay, I'll grab this idea from something she did with Dizzy Gillespie, this idea from something she did with Mary Lou Williams, this idea from something she did with Randy Weston. Yeah. And for the first movement, the Born in Kansas City, of course, she hasn't made any work at that point. So I grabbed a contemporary African-American poet text and set it as kind of a spiritual. Yeah. But that just allows, like, you can a way through the blank page. That's the hardest thing. You're sitting, looking at the blank page, and what do you do? There's too many options. So it helps me to have like, okay, this is going to be about this. These three notes, this one rhythm, this story, anything. Yeah. Well, I was on a walk the other night, before you guys had got in, and was talking to Lydia about Melba, and I was like, wow, what a triumph of a record, and also how cool to take somebody who unfairly kind of has not been one of the main names that we've heard all of the time. I would be so curious, since, ashamedly, like, I did not know the name Melba Liston. How did you stumble across that name? Well, I first became aware of her when I was in undergrad. I was working at a record store, and I was always, kind of crate digger, record hound person. And around that time, Randy Weston's record, Spirit of Our Ancestors, came out. And Dizzy Gillespie was on it, and I was a huge Dizzy fan, of course, and had seen him. That was my wife and my first date, was seeing Dizzy Gillespie at the Jazz Showcase in Chicago. And a lot of great saxophone players on it, Pharoah Sanders, Dewey Redman, Billy Harper, I think. It's an amazing record, like sprawling and beautiful, and it says all arrangements by Melba Liston. It's like, I have no idea who that is. So started to see her name pop up here and there. But I have to admit, like, I wasn't aware of the scope of her work until 2009, 2010. I'd finished the African Flowers Project and was trying to figure out like what to do next. Maybe it's 2011 by this time. And my wife, who's an academic, said, "Oh, you should apply for this fellowship at the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, which is this organization in Chicago. It's University of Chicago, a bunch of other archives and stuff." I'm like, I don't want to do research. I want to take my band on the road and make some music and play some gigs.
Right.
It's like, so you should just take a look at it. Yeah. And so I went and looked at the Center for Black Music Research and what they had in their archives, and they had 50 boxes of Melba Liston scores. Yeah. And so I applied. I had no idea what would be in there. I was hoping to find a lot of tunes that had never been recorded. Really.
Sure, yeah.
And there were a couple of those, like a couple of manuscripts of Randy Weston's sketches. But mostly it was just like, oh, she wrote for everybody. And it had her handwritten scores of Mary Lou Williams and like the Zodiac pieces for her, and on this stuff for Dizzy and the stuff for Randy from that Spirits of Our Ancestors. And it didn't say Tenor 1, it said Pharoah Sanders on it. Yeah. And not Tenor 2, but Dewey Rev. I was, amazing I went through that stuff. I just treated it like a job and went down there every day, 6 hours a day or so for the month or two that I was on that fellowship. Yeah. You couldn't photocopy anything, so I copied a lot of stuff out by hand. Sure. When they weren't looking, I put it in Sibelius on my computer. But, and then I used pieces of that to generate the music for Melba. Yeah. Measures here and there.
Yeah, you said that there was kind of a reluctance to want to get into kind of that, research. I won't put an overall stamp of saying like that academic side of things, but were you teaching at the time?
I was, but like many of us, I was teaching adjunct, just saxophone lessons, and I taught music theory at Columbia College, which is where just by chance, which is where the Center for Black Music Research was housed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So in that reluctance, how quickly into checking out the archives did that kind of switch to like, oh no, this is the thing that I have
I opened a box and it changed.
Okay, so instantly.
I was like, are you kidding? Just looking through the PDF of what was in it. Yeah, it changed everything. It was just like, she doesn't have everything from all the sessions she did, because I think it didn't matter that much to her once it was done. Yeah. And sometimes Randy kept things that she didn't keep, and his archives are at Harvard. So it's not like it's complete, and it requires a lot of digging to figure out, but there were some real gems in there. All the music from a session she arranged for Elvin Jones, that is hard to even find streaming now.
Right. Well, you had said that there were a lot that had not even been recorded in the first place. As somebody who is stumbling across these things, I would almost like, for me, even if I was excited to be like, oh, well, maybe in some project I'll record this so it can finally be heard. But at the same time, I'd be like, but I don't want to be the one who messes it up. Like, how do you feel on that kind of?
Yeah, I think I'm fine being the one who messes it up in general. Like,
you're finding that you're the one who does.
I'm fine. I'm fine being that one.
Okay, I was about to say, I don't think you messed up anything, but okay, yeah.
Like, I just figure like, well, it's only my take on it. It's not some definitive, most perfect version. So my version will be my version, right? Yeah. But that was my original intent. I thought, well, I'll find a bunch of things that are basically unknown or under. There wasn't quite enough of that in there to put together a project that was just that. So instead, it was kind of like getting a master's degree or postdoc in arranging by studying her scores and seeing how she worked.
Sure. And all of the pieces that you wrote for the album are not her pieces, but pieces that you wrote that were inspired by her.
Yes, but they're all based on at least a fragment of her music.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man, that is brilliant. That's so brilliant. I think I saw a quote that Randy Weston said that it was like, Melba got me, and it seems like Melba got you too. Yeah. So kind of interpreting his words, even though we're not putting words in his mouth, like, let me just ask you the question, how did Melba get you? What was it characteristically about her writing that turned that reluctance into total fascination?
Yeah, I mean, early on, it was just ignorance. I didn't realize how much of what I'd heard she had some hand in, whether it was Marvin Gaye or Bob Marley or whatever, Still, it's hard to know that because arrangers don't always get credit,
Mhm.
like what specific project she did. For me, it was really Randy Weston, who I had loved since undergrad. Like, I always just thought he was, in a way, like the most perfect, not solution, I can't think of the right word, but just embodiment
Sure.
of what I wanted to be as a musician. Had all of these roots that, weren't only deep in jazz, but in all African diaspora music. Yet he sounded modern and he sounded free and open, and it wasn't didactic, and
Yeah.
it seemed like it could go any direction, but was always grounded, swinging, joyful. Like had all these components that I wanted to have in my music. And so I listened to him tons, and that's really how I got into her. And then Mary Lou in the same way.
Yeah, that's insane. So when did you start writing, like, for, I guess, more than just lead sheets and kind of larger ensemble?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I really wasn't much of a writer in undergrad, and then when I went to Cal Arts, there was a real emphasis on the composition side there. So I started writing more, writing a little bit for more horns and things like that. But then I moved to New York, where putting something larger together was pretty hard. And a lot of that was, I was writing longer pieces and writing things that had different kinds of forms and weren't tunes per se, but were compositions. But they were always for a small number of people, like maybe 2 horns or something.
Yeah.
And I would say that not until African Flowers was I really trying to write something that was larger in scope, and that was around 2009.
Yeah, right. How do you feel that your kind of composing and arranging style has evolved? Can you think of specific characteristics from 2009 to what you're writing today?
Yeah, hopefully I'm just a little better at it than I was then.
Sure.
I think a lot of the pieces weren't in place at that time. I mean, one thing is that I always struggle with is trying to achieve the effect that I want to achieve in the simplest way possible.
Yeah.
It's easy to write something that's hard for the musicians to play that achieves the effect that you want to some extent, and that doesn't feel good, and that it's too cluttered and too crowded and too specific and leaves no room to breathe. That's not very hard to do, actually.
Right.
It's actually way too easy to do. What's harder is thinking about, like, how can I achieve the musical effect I want and effectively use the band members I have, their voices, and make it so that everybody feels they can express themselves and have a good time playing. And, it still feels like, it should feel like we're getting together and playing tunes, music we know.
Right.
At an ideal level. And if it doesn't feel like that, we're choking off a lot of we're choking off a lot of our band members' abilities.
Yeah.
Because I like to play with people who stretch and rhythm sections who mix it up.
Yeah.
And if I dictate everything they're going to do from the writing standpoint, I've just kind of undermined myself musically as the band leader.
Sure.
So that's the challenge I think I've tried to deal with most in, like, the intervening 12 years or so, is how do I cut to the chase?
Yeah.
And write a melody that feels organic and natural and simple, and write an accompaniment for that melody that feels inevitable.
Yeah. Man, there are certain things, like certain moments where I'm, like, least expecting it, just maybe because it's like a car ride or whatever, like maybe a casual scenario. And then I'll hear some of, like, the most profound things, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to carry that with me till the day I die.
Yeah.
And it's something that you said in the car to the Elephant Room the other day, which is that you were talking about, writing hard music or writing simplistic music. And you were like, it doesn't matter how hard something is, as long as it's worth, like, the payoff is worth the work that you put into it.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful metric. Is that something that you kind of have carried with you from the beginning, or is that something you've come to?
No, that's something I had to learn.
Sure.
Yeah, because I think there's a sort of like, it's sort of like a machismo thing.
Yeah.
It's not gendered, but it's machismo in a way, to, like, I'm gonna write some really hard music.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna write something so hard that this super bad drummer I play with is gonna, like, he's gonna fold, man.
Oh, no.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna make it so hard that George Flutis can't. There's some weird machismo to that. Like, I write the hardest music.
Yeah. Remember, down the barrel of the lens when you're going to talk mess about George Flutis.
Right.
No,
right.
But continue.
I'm sort of saying, if I write something that somebody like George Flutis or Dana Hall can't play, I should probably reassess what I'm writing.
Right.
It means it doesn't feel natural in some way. I think.
Right.
And this is not to to put down anybody who writes extremely challenging music. Like somebody like, I think about Matt Mitchell, who's a brilliant musician, great piano player, and writes incredibly challenging music, which I haven't played, but I've seen on the paper. And I would have a very hard time playing. He's dealing with a different skill set, and the demands for the music that, and the community he's carved out that can play that music, that's not hard for them, or it is hard, but it's in the doable range. Steve Coleman, that stuff's really hard for people who aren't part of that musical community. But that's what they do. That's different. If you have a musical community around this music that external people find very challenging, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, plenty of people who don't play my music would find it very challenging. But the people I work with all the time for 20 years should be like, okay, I get it. After a short rehearsal.
It's developing kind of an expectation of what is kind of expected from that specific ensemble.
Absolutely.
And not everybody has to be in that like ensemble, right? Like, you know, I haven't experienced any of that where people have been like, I don't want to be in the ensemble. But like with the big band, whenever we first started, you know, out with all the charts that we've been doing since July, you know, each show we're doing between 9 and in the case of one show, like 12 new charts that are specifically written for the show each time, and we're not recycling tunes in the interest of just kind of like, you know, first 2 years, building a book and also keeping it fresh for the audience to like come back and see all this stuff. And, you know, a lot of the musicians will say sometimes, they'll be like, yeah, music's really hard, man. Like it's not, and I'm like, yeah, well, we're not, you know, reading stuff that's just going to be like straight, like read it straight down, and it's just going to be swinging. And it's a lot of, you know.
But none of it felt like overridden or unnatural.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you to say.
I think that's the tell. Like, I mean, if you have a bunch of professional musicians, they get through like, I need another pass at that. Yeah, cool, great, of course.
Yeah,
and most of us want that balance of like the 50-50 split, right? It's challenging half the time, it's in our wheelhouse half the time. You have to push a little bit.
Exactly, right. And I think that's like another thing too with styles, right? You know, I try to make sure that every show is really balanced in terms of like all the, you know, so it feels like a, you know, a full plate, like a meal for the audience and for the musicians. You know, sometimes it might be a little heavier on one side than the other, but like I think it all comes out in the wash, like, because again, you know, you'll just get a balance as time goes on. What I really love about you saying that, you know, if you write something that is so hard that's specifically designed to maybe like vibe somebody, you know, go to the, was it you talking about the Vibe Confessional or the Jive Confessional? Right, yeah. We're going to make it a thing. It's in the ether now.
For sure.
But you're saying that it's almost like, you know, cutting off at the knees, like the people who you want to like be your collaborators and go along with you, which is kind of the most perfect segue into talking about the idea of yes and, right? Because that would be nah, you know, like, and I've seen that happen at like stand-up, or not stand-up, improvised comedy nights, and somebody just like totally takes it another way, and everybody just, you see like the life drain out of everybody on stage, kidding me, man? Like, just go with it.
You can feel it on the bandstand when somebody does that. When they undercut something that was thrown out there by something else, or where they are determined to have their own agenda. In some way.
Right. Chris was telling me whenever I was asking him about, because I knew that he liked stand-up specials and comedy podcasts, and I was asking him about it on the show, and he was like, oh, well, the person who you really need to talk to about comedy stuff is Geof with his album. And I was like, I already got it on the list, man. Like, I've checked it out. And I would love to start by asking, who did the album art, and how does that speak to like the music itself? Because it's very hip album art.
Oh yeah, this design is gonna take me 1 second to remember the name just because it's morning. Sonnenzimmer.
Okay.
And they did the General Semantics art too.
Oh, cool.
They're a team in Nick and Nadine in Chicago.
Okay.
That, in fact, that's another intersection with my wife. They had worked with one of her classes on design, and we had for years had one of their pieces hanging above the piano, and I had never met them. I still have only met them on Zoom. And so I just didn't put the pieces together when I was looking for an artist for the album. She's like, oh, you should totally call Nick and Nadine.
Yeah.
I'm like, whatever. I have a couple of people I know who do album art. It's cool. It's cool. You can see how this pattern goes with my wife. She already like has the exactly the right idea of what I should do next.
The plan, the best
but I'm
interest.
Resistant. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I just didn't realize that this thing hanging above the piano was by the people she was suggesting.
Wow.
I was like, and so one day I'm like, I really like that. Who did that? She's like, Nick and Nadine from Sansa.
Yeah,
So
right.
I called them, and they were great. And that was a kind of funny experience with the record label at the time, because the label was changing hands, and they were very patient with all the sort of the changes that required as we went along. But yeah, they make beautiful stuff. You can find them on their website, Sonnenzimmer.
Okay, totally. So, specifically about your interest in comedy and crossing that over into this album where, comedy and music have that shared component, which is improvisation. Right? So, what's your foray into comedy? What are your favorite specials, outlets, etc.?
Man, I probably like the stuff that just about everybody does, especially jazz musicians. We love Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
And, I just watched that special on Robin Williams. It was tragic but beautiful. The greats of my generation, some of the older cats like Red Fox.
Yeah.
And I like anybody who's got a flow.
Yeah.
And seems to have some improvisational element to what they're doing.
Totally.
But really, like the yes and theme comes from the Compass Players, right? Which is the ancestor to Second City, like the one generation before Second City. And so it makes it to Second City and it's comedy, but Compass Players did so much more than just comedy. Not that comedy's a just comedy, right?
Sure.
But they put on Bertolt Brecht plays for the first time in the United States. And they started, or they were one of the main sources for improvisational theater, not just comedy.
Yeah.
So like Viola Spolin games, for instance, which Yes and is one of those improvisational games. And the way they would structure things is, and I mean, aside from their shows are at the Compass Bar in Hyde Park, right?
Yeah.
Near the University of Chicago campus. And Sun Ra played music for some of them.
Wow.
So when I heard that, I was like, well, this has got to be a thing.
Yeah, right.
But what I liked about it was they would have some bigger set pieces, like the Bertolt Brecht plays, and they would intersperse them with shorter improvised sketches. And I like that format, and that's what happens on the record. There are 4 larger set, more composed pieces, and then there were 4 pieces that are no more than like 8 measures of information.
Yeah.
And in most cases less, 2 to 4 measures of information for a smaller unit, a unit of 3 within the group of 9.
Yeah, which is beautiful too, because it kind of has this idea of flow, right? Like a bridge to the next big thing, which is very, what's the word? Like you have a heart for the audience in that way, where you're like, all right, I want to make sure that this flows, and it's an attentiveness, to the audience and that flow, because of course we know what it's like to be an audience member as well. So how can we achieve that while also not compromising our own?
Right, and it's nice to have a little palate cleanser when you're listening to something larger. I mean, in a big band setting like yours, you get that when it breaks down for the soloist, it breaks down for the singer, it changes orchestral. You can do it with color, or you can do it with number of people playing, right? and length of tune.
Yeah, right. Now, why was it specifically a non-ad?
That's a good question. I think I had a reason.
Okay.
I like symmetry. And, excuse me.
No, take your time.
And a lot of my music revolves around some kind of symmetry. Rhythmic symmetry, pitch symmetry, and things like that. I mean, I try to hide it so it's not super evident.
Sure.
But it's another good taking off place for me. So the number 9 works a lot of ways in that particular piece. Most of it's based on a 9-note scale by Olivier Messiaen, one of his modes of limited transposition, the third one, which anybody who's interested can go look up in Wikipedia. I won't bore the non-theory-ended audience with that one right now. And I like the idea of having a group of 9 people and 3 in each section. There's 3 brass, 3 rhythm, 3 woodwinds, in a way that, like, to me, creates this kind of triangle where you can imagine one section or the other rotating to prominence at a given time, or all being balanced like an equilateral triangle. And several of the pieces have tripart structure, so it informs it in a lot of ways.
Totally, man, very, very cool. Now, this work, is it okay to talk about the expansion?
Sure.
Okay, so now revisiting this, what brought on the expansion?
Partially people I've worked with that I want to work with more. So I want to bring Ben Goldberg into it. And then when I thought about bringing Ben into it, I thought, well, if I bring again, my problem with symmetry, which is probably like a sort of like neurotic hang up. But if I bring Ben in, then I need somebody else in the brass section, and I need somebody else in the rhythm section too. I have to balance them. And I wanted to use some different instruments. So in the brass section, I'm thinking about a couple people who double on tuba and on trombone.
Yeah.
And then changing another trombone part out for French horn, because I met a French horn player that I think is really amazing in Chicago. I haven't asked to do it yet, so I won't mention her name here, but I hope she'll do it. And then in the rhythm section, my friend and colleague Greg Beyer, and this is where the other part of the project comes in. He's a percussionist, and he plays berimbau, the Afro-Brazilian bowed instrument, right? And I play mbira, and he also plays some mbira.
Yeah.
So the Zimbabwean, some people would say, Zimbabwean thumb piano. It's so much more than that, but if you know what a thumb piano or kalimba is, mbira is like it, but it's many more keys, like a 24, 23 key instrument, depending on what you have.
Gotcha.
So anyway, I wanted to incorporate the African instruments into it. That's one of my main goals with this project, is to get the mbira and the berimbau in there with the rest of the ensemble. So I'm writing around those instruments, which are diatonic instruments with a limited pitch set for starters, and then trying to, rather than going the other way of like, how do I write this jazz tune and then get this instrument that doesn't play all 12 notes in it, like I have to go the other direction.
Sure.
And use the instruments for what they're best at, which is a lot of its rhythm and rhythmic textures created with repetition on those instruments. So that also brings up my number to 12, which is sort of a magic number in music, right? 12 pitches, 12/8 rhythm from Africa. 12 is the smallest, colossal number, where you have like the high number of dividers for a small number, right? So 4 times 3, 2 times 6, 1 times 12. You can break it up a bunch of different ways. So it means you can break the ensembles up into a bunch of symmetrical units.
Totally. I really want in the post edit, as you're doing all those numbers, for it to just go to me and just like a blank face and just like the numbers kind of like,
how we can do that,
going around and just
excellent.
Oh God, it's like, Jeff, I told you, man, I went into music because I couldn't figure out accounting, man. Like that's
right.
But
we never have to count higher than 12.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true. Yeah. But yeah, so is that also the expansion? Is that something that is part of the New Works program as well?
No, in fact, I mean, I would apply for one if I could,
sure.
but I think their upper limit for personnel is 10 for that.
Okay.
So I'm gonna have to find another bag of money somewhere else.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. Open invitation to everyone watching this. Big bag of money. Just send it. What's the address? What's your home address?
You can, you can just contact me on my website.
Yeah, right.
You can be the first funder for Colossal Abundance.
Colossal Abundance.
I was trying to remember what those numbers are called that have a lot of, right? They're called Colossally Abundant number or Colossal Abundant.
Got it. Okay.
Which is a beautiful thing. Like, so if you're thinking about it from like a poetic standpoint, and it's tied to, my music's tied to African traditions, right? And this through the mbira and through my own research and stuff, and of course through jazz, right?
Yeah.
That's the story of Africa. It's this story of colossal abundance of resources, of culture, this incredible richness that then is plundered.
Yeah.
Plundered, and you see, you have people in one of the richest countries in the world in many ways in terms of mineral wealth, however you want to look at it, cultural, mineral, anything, natural beauty, living in the most dire, desperate circumstances.
Yeah, sure.
So it's a sort of tragedy of colossal abundance. It was so great that it attracted all the vultures of colonialism.
Sure. And you spent time there, right?
Yes, I was fortunate to spend 4 or 5 weeks there through a American Music Abroad program, the Rhythm Road through Jazz Lincoln Center. Yeah.
Did that have a sizable impact on the way that you approach your composition and arranging process?
Oh, tremendous. I mean, I was into African music from, when I was 19 or 20, I heard some groups and started to get into it then. But being there was different. Connecting with a bunch of African people is different than just having a bunch of African records.
Sure.
And that was really meaningful, especially in Zimbabwe, where I heard an mbira ensemble live for the first time with the dancing and singing, and I mean it's just absolutely mind-blowing, breathtakingly beautiful.
Yeah. And is that where you started playing it, or did you come back and then pick it up?
Yeah, so I bought an Ibira there, but ignorant gringo that I am, like I just didn't know how to choose one, and the instrument I bought, I spent a long time tuning it, and it plays, but it's not a great instrument. So later I bought a couple nicer Ibira, and have been playing those.
Yeah, I asked you in the car the other day if you would like to go back and like go and do more stuff over there. Yeah. Are those, because I feel like this is another thing, whether it's grants, commission work, or kind of those programs and such, I feel like we hear about them, but they can be so scary because we don't necessarily know where to look. Like a lot of people like my generation are just kind of, without diving too much into my own, I was going to say, without diving in too much of my own bias on a show that my name is part of the title, go figure.
That's probably, that ship's probably sailed.
Yeah, right. It's over. It's over. That's a wrap. Let's get out of here. Let's go to lunch. I feel like because maybe some cultural norms of, you just got to work hard. No one's going to give you a handout and that kind of whole thing.
The American Puritan work ethic.
Right. It kind of makes us just shut down from even seeking those things out because we almost think that they're too good to be true because we're being told from a young age that nobody's going to want to support something like that. And then you look at like European countries that have these like robust like government funded programs to lift up the arts, in ways where like we look at the more ancient civilizations, or just like, Greek civilizations from hundreds of years ago, several centuries back. And like the arts were like one of the fundamentals in the same way that we think of mathematics and et cetera. But again, so if I almost feel like this is a great opportunity to hear from you, for myself and anyone else, of like what that process looks like and how attainable those kind of things are when we're kind of forced to think that they aren't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one simple answer to that. I think the first thing is, one thing I see that's problematic sometimes with young artists who are aware of this, sometimes they're aware of it before they have something to offer. Like that, okay, I should be going out and trying to get a grant, or I should go to grad school so I can get a full-time job teaching college, or I should, those are great goals for in 10 years in your future or something. Maybe not even that far, right? But first, shouldn't you have something to offer as a musician in person? Which I think that's the first step. And I do think if you pursue, I have to believe this because it keeps me going.
Yeah.
That if you avidly pursue something that you're really passionate about, that as long as you keep your eyes and ears open and you're determined to make it happen, many of those other pieces will fall into place. I don't mean they'll take care of themselves, but the opportunities will arise, the interaction with other musicians or promoters or grant writers or whatever, you will naturally hit a lot of those interaction points. So I just want to preface, the first thing I think is the music, the work. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is, well, okay, now I have this music and work, and I need some money to make it happen.
Yeah, right.
I mean, when I look at recording a 12-piece group and trying to engineer a performance or two, just getting past the scheduling stage of that, as you know, is expensive in terms of time, if not money, and renting a space, and there's so many components to it. And you want to do it justice if you spent a lot of time putting this large project together. So you don't want to be, pinching pennies as you go into the recording studio.
Totally.
And it just requires a lot of money and a lot of personal time from everybody involved, from all the supporting staff. People don't necessarily see all of this.
Right. So
you got to find some money, right? It's a reality. I would say to most, you're talking specifically about younger cats who may have a project and be looking for something, but I think this also applies to an older generation who's never had to look for this kind of stuff because there were gigs, there were other sources.
Right.
Like now you see Wayne, the last time I got a CMA grant, Wayne Shorter was one of the other grantees out of 9 people.
Whoa. And
Ambrose Sakamusire. And it was like, all right, everybody's applying for this stuff now.
Yeah.
I would say that start local, like politics, and branch out to national and international.
Yeah.
Your city might have something.
Mm.
Your family might work for a company that offers something.
Mm-hmm.
If you teach at a school, there might be a professional development grant.
Yeah.
But make sure you're actually aware of what's available locally.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to go talk to people who do this.
Yeah.
If there's any serious organization that's not just funded by an angel of some sort, has a grant writing person. And a lot of those organizations have somebody too. Take the grant writer out to lunch.
Yeah.
And then look at what does your state offer. Most states offer some version of federal money that's filtered through the state. And it may be in combination with state money for artists. And it may be to go into schools and teach kids. It may be that it doesn't directly do what you want it to do. You're like, I want to make a record, but this is just for, but you can take your band into the schools and play your music for a live audience and start to build some relationships and get your band working and pay them. And then you just saved a lot of rehearsal time.
Yeah.
For your studio project. Be creative. On the national scale, there are two categories. There are organizations that fund individuals and organizations that fund 501c and other not-for-profits.
Right.
So it's important to see, am I really eligible for this before I apply for it? Yeah. And am I making something up? Is it a stretch to put myself in this category? Or am I really the kind of artist, composer, performer that gets funded by this? Look at who was funded by it before. If you look at the list of, say, New Music USA, and you're like, I don't know any of these people or the work they make, that's probably not where you should be applying.
Sure. You
look at the Chamber Music America organization, you're like, oh, I know X, Y, and Z. Oh, I've worked with them. Okay, they got funded. Okay, I'm going to apply there.
Yeah. That's incredibly interesting and also very insightful too. And of course, we know Austin has several of those grants, but also I didn't know the thing about the national thing, right?
Yeah.
That it's split between individuals and not-for-profits.
Yeah, and even more regional stuff splits up that way.
Right. And what you were saying at the beginning of that topic was, people say, I'm going to go to a graduate program, because it'll yield X, Y, and Z. I'm going to get a grant because then it'll force me to make the thing happen.
That's a cart before horse issue to me.
Right. Don't let me forget. I've got a cart before the horse joke for you later. I won't subject the audience to it now.
I mean, we are in Texas, so horse jokes.
We are. Yeah. They're abundant.
Okay.
Colossally abundant. Yeah, right. But there is something to be said about a motivation to get something done, but at the same time making sure that the motivation is in the right place. That it's not like, oh, I want to get, this is my end goal. I want to get the grant, but whatever comes after is whatever it is, because that's not honest about the whole thing. But I'm curious, whenever you are working on a project that you have gotten funding through a grant or something that you've been commissioned to do you work better under a deadline, or is your creative process less inhibited?
Deadline.
Okay.
Deadline.
Yeah.
Even if it's self-created.
Okay.
So some of mine are self-created for sure, and I set mine way before the actual deadlines of the pieces because I want to get music out to people. I want to have time to workshop and to think about it. But it really does help to have a deadline.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm sure there's for all of us a folder now on our computers of half-written work that we didn't give ourselves a deadline. It's maybe I'll come back around to that later,
I know one, I'm not going to mention his name because he's fairly famous, but a friend of mine who's a well-known composer, he will force a deadline by calling his commissioning client, and setting up a lunch meeting for next week to show him what he has so far. He'll do it at a time where he hasn't written anything yet. And then we'll just cram for a week because he has this lunch meeting.
That gives me so much anxiety.
Yeah. No, he says he writes best under a lot of pressure.
Wow. Has it been that way always for you?
I don't like a lot of pressure.
Yeah, right.
I wouldn't do that, but I like a deadline.
Yeah. Interesting.
Deadline tells you when you're finished. I could have kept writing Melba. I could have kept tweaking yes and for ages left to
Yeah.
my own devices. But the deadline is, well, okay, we start rehearsal tomorrow, and I have to get parts out to everyone.
Yeah.
So
For me, I find that it's almost the easiest part is going into the studio for me because and this is something I'm trying to get better about, like relinquishing control over a thing, because I will toil on every last speaker I can find in a 5-mile radius of wherever I'm at about the mixes and masters and like producing my own thing. And I'm trying to get better about being like, okay, the next one, I really like this person's work. Maybe I'll co-produce because I don't want to hand it off entirely because I want to have a hand in it. But I also feel like I'm just going to get really neurotic because I went through 10 rounds of mixes on my last one. And it was like, and it wasn't like every single tune was 10. It was like maybe the second one for one tune. And then the rest, it was just like, and it was really a testament to my engineer who was amazing. And I would keep apologizing, and I'm like, just let me know like what your bottle of choice is, and I'm sending like 5 of them over because I'm just taking so much of your time, and of course paying him as well, but just felt bad. And he said something to me. It's the guy who usually is running sound here. His name's Charlie Kramsky, and he was like, you don't know what you like until you hear what you don't like. Never apologize for that. But
that's good.
It can be kind of debilitating to only be the person because you get so close to it. What about you? What do you like to be involved in the mixing and mastering notes?
I'm involved, but I'd say like, in the last many years, I've worked with kind of one of two extremes in terms of that post-production. One is Rich Breen in Los Angeles, who did, what was that? There's a film about LA director that was out, Mank.
Oh yeah, I think it's Mank, right?
Mank, right?
Yeah, with
so
Gary Oldman.
He does that kind of thing. That was his sound for that, all done remotely. Yeah, because of the pandemic.
Sure.
And stuff at Abbey Road, and he's a heavy film guy who's also has a degree in jazz piano from Eastman and is a mandolin player, and like he's a very, very interesting guy and really brilliant. So I do stuff remotely with him, and I know him because he's mixed some sessions with my friend Ryan Cohan that I'm on. And so we have a good personal relationship. And he'll send me something back, and sometimes he'll send me another mix before I even have a chance to listen to the mix. He's like, I think this is better. And usually I listen to it, I'm like, this is almost perfect for me. I want just a little more bass here, or I can't hear the guitar in the ensemble here. It's important. But he's so detail-oriented and obviously reads music and will go through. I send him the scores. He doesn't just want my like notes on what I think about the session or something. He's like, that's nice, send me the score. And so he'll look at what I wrote in terms of dynamics and everything and realize it.
Wow, that's the most valuable, because then it becomes, I feel like maybe unfairly so, we just don't naturally think of the engineer as being a part of the band.
And that's not how all engineers work. He's sort of special that way, which makes him great for a more complex musical project. So that's one extreme. And then the other extreme is my friend Ken Christensen, who's a brilliant recording engineer. He recorded General Semantics, and he recorded this new live quintet from the Grain Mill that's going to be coming out soon. And many other things for me over the years. And his thing is true stereo. He wants it to sound like you're in the room listening to it. Just 2 mics. He'll use more mics if it's a studio recording, but a lot of it's live with just 2 mics. And he used to record direct to tape to Nagra. Now he records to a digital Nagra, which it sounds amazing right off the box. And he barely does anything to it after it's done. It's very like, I don't want to say lo-fi, and Ken would be mad if I said audiophile, because he wouldn't feel like it's either one of those. He's like, it just sounds real. Which it does.
Now, this quintet record that's coming out, I know that all of your projects are a wide different array of instrumentations. What's the quintet?
It's myself on just tenor saxophone this time, Russ Johnson on trumpet, Dana Hall on the drums, Clark Sommers on bass, and Scott Hesse on guitar. So it's sort of like the core of the NonAd Group.
Okay.
And that quintet was in residency at the Gimreich Festival in November 2019, right before the pandemic. So prior to this run of performances, that was our last thing together. And so there was, an 18-month, 2-year almost intermission in between that. So, we had those 2 weeks together, really magical in Portugal, and we played every night, and it was cooking. See, I just didn't know what it would be like putting it back together. If we'd have I imagine there'd be a little run up to get it back to that level.
Yeah.
It was back at that level or above it on the first gig, and we didn't rehearse.
Yeah.
And we had some new music, which we also didn't rehearse, and just worked it out on the 6 gigs or so we had over 10 days, and then recorded live at the mill at the end of it.
Amazing. Is it all original compositions?
Except for a couple things. There's Herbie Hancock's Promise of the Sun from his record, The Prisoner. It's a really important record to me as a writer. It's Herbie's dedication to Martin Luther King and his inspiration for a lot of the work I do from a writing standpoint.
Could you tell me more about that?
Oh yeah, I mean I've loved that record for a long time. It's an amazing record, and it's also, I believe, a non-ed. I'd probably have to go through and count. Joe Henderson, Johnny Coles. He uses instruments uses the bass clarinet, so some of the sonic colors I like with bass trombone and flute. Hubert Law's playing flute. It's a beautifully expressive record, and it's, to me, like a really logical extension of Herbie's Speak Like a Child, where it's about the trio on Speak Like a Child, and the horns are to support the trio.
Yeah.
Here, the horns have a little bit more room. They have some solo space and stuff. And just the sounds and textures that Herbie gets on it. And I studied with Tootie Heath, who's on that session. And so I remember in school, Tootie telling me that Herbie showed up basically with sketches.
Yeah.
And Duke Pearson, who was the A&R guy and great pianist at Blue Note Records, Herbie and Duke would sit down while they're all hanging out in the studio, orchestrate it for the non-ed, record a tune, and they'd take a break, and Duke and Herbie would orchestrate the next one. And
that's like that thing of like setting the meeting for yourself, but you don't have a week.
Yeah,
You've
it's
got
really
like
sophisticated music.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the pieces that's on it, I forget which one, started off as a cigarette jingle, actually, that Herbie wrote. And then he turned it in. He's like, oh, I really like the sound I got on that with the trombones and the tenor, and I'm going to make that a thing. Yeah. But yeah, it's a beautiful record. I highly recommend it. I transcribed that whole record, all the arrangements on it, many years ago. We performed it at Fulton Street Collective in Chicago. Okay. It took me probably 100 hours to transcribe that record because the sound quality with all the low instruments is quite muddy. And it's hard to separate out what's doing what where. And also, they recorded it very quickly, and it is not totally clean and perfect. But it's a glorious record, which is a testament of the spirit and the concept transcends a cacked note here and there. Yeah.
Well, that's something that I started to, what's that tune? Aranel, where I'd listen to the recording and I was like, is it? And I don't want to be on record, even though I just now made myself on record being like this, but I was like, homie is way out of tune.
Charlie Rouse plays sharp.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah. And I was like, what's going on here? And I remember listening to that and having this kind of moment where I was like, oh, I'm toiling over the creak of a piano bench on my album. And I'm like, can we open up Isotope and just highlight it and delete it? Yeah. I'm like, wait, that's not how people were trying to do it.
Right.
And now we're just focused on making the perfect album. It's also interesting about whenever you make albums and then you go back and you listen to your favorite people's albums, which is basically what I've just been saying. But I would listen back to I remember while I was working on my third record, I would go back and listen to Kurt's Beautiful Day, Christmas album. And I was like, oh, there's again, nothing that sounds bad, but just little imperfections here and there, if I'm listening with really nice headphones. And it's just funny how we've gotten to a point where we have to get so surgical about the thing. And it's but that's not what's important.
It's also not how people hear.
Yeah.
Flow over perfection. So I'll choose a take where it's not even my favorite solo of me.
Yeah.
Where there's some flaw. If the rhythm section is all this is the better take, I'm not going to argue with, because my perception is always going to be of my solo that, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, or I could have done this better, or I think this other one's better if we just take one more pass.
Yeah.
But I tried not to think about that in the studio, to accept that whatever I get in terms of my playing is going to be an accurate snapshot within a certain range of how I play at this point in my life. As you get more developed as a player. I was going to say older, but some people are so developed by the time they're 19 or 20, it's the same thing, But like the deeper you are into who you are,
Yeah.
it's going to sound like you.
Yeah.
Your warts and all.
Yeah.
And so it's best to worry about other things like, is the vibe good? Is it swinging? Is it grooving? Do I pat my foot to this track? Is this one more booty shaking or is this one more, something, just anything except for the navel gazing focus on yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's my new metric for everything.
Yeah.
Is this booty shaking or is this not booty shaking?
Yeah.
And
I'm talking about a literal conversation in the studio with a friend years ago.
Yeah, right,
we were
right.
recording some Afro pop tune.
Okay.
And I'm like, but my solo's so much better on this one. And I think it was Jeff Parker, great guitar player, who was like, yeah, but this one's more booty shaking.
Amazing. Yeah, but that's ultimate humility as a band leader, and what an amazing way to like also set an example of like, no, I'm gonna go with the one that was like the best overall, and I'm gonna take my pride out of like the equation. It's like, no, this is just about the music.
Or it is my pride. I take pride in the whole thing sounding good.
Oh, right. That a shift, a refocusing of the word pride. I love that.
Like it's not a test. Like nobody's going through with the scorecard and marking me like, high G sharp, kind of cracked that one.
Yeah, right.
Take 2 points off. It's not the Olympics, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think some of us get that, and again, this is not any sort of like condemnation of academia, because it of course we have to have it, and it serves as such a pivotal role. But I think that can be one of the unfortunate byproducts, and not even in music, just in terms of like standardized tests.
I think it's also a byproduct of how we record now. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to go back and do it. Yeah. If you had to go back and cut tape for everything, you would not make the changes.
Yeah, right.
So when you go, and like some of us, I record on tape occasionally with some people, right?
Yeah.
Still analog tapes. Sounds beautiful. Mm-hmm. No, we're not going to go fix that note.
Yeah, right.
It's not even possible.
Totally. Yeah. We are barreling.
This is it. This is it. We can do an insert, or when I record with Ken Christensen, there's no overdubbing. There might be a rare occasion. I mean, especially the live stuff is all whatever it was. We did 2 nights. There are 2 takes of each tune. Choose the better one.
Yeah.
But then we did the studio the next day. Yeah, we could do like an insert if the piece comes to a stop at some point. Mm-hmm. We could start from where it stopped. Yeah. Possibly something like that. But we can't just go fix an individual part. We're all in the same room.
Yeah. Are you mixing live takes and studio takes?
I probably will, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Is there I would assume, because with an audience live, right?
Yeah.
So
packed house at the Green Mill, it's pretty raucous.
Yeah.
Although they were really quiet. I mean, we played something so quiet there that was 10 minutes long, and they were, crickets.
What a gift.
It's great, yeah.
Right?
It's a great audience.
The best gift. That'll be such an interesting dynamic to hear a back and forth between live and...
Ken is really amazingly able to match it up pretty closely. I mean, the studio stuff is cleaner, but the live stuff sounds great.
Yeah.
It's closer than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
General Semantics is mixed live and in studio.
Yeah.
And I think as you're listening to it, I don't really notice it as I'm going through it.
Yeah. I don't either. I think at one point I heard like the applause, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Interesting, because the rest of it sounded like it was in the studio. We stopped short of saying what the second tune was. That was
by one of my favorite composers, Hermeto Pascoal, the great Brazilian composer. And it's he made this. I think it's around 1996. He decided to write a song every day of the year as a leap year.
Yeah.
So that everybody would have a song for their birthday.
Wow.
And so he made this book, Calendar of Days, which is like just, it's the 366 songs because leap year.
Yeah.
And so I arranged the one for my birthday, June 30th.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. When is this coming out?
Yeah,
because now I need to hear it.
Yeah. I was hoping for this fall, but things are really pushed back because people came out of COVID with projects. And,
Sure.
So either fall 22, spring 23.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, incidentally, on General Semantics, August 8th is another one of those calendar of days, and that's been Goldberg's birthday. So when I knew he was coming to town, I arranged that for him without telling him what it was. And he's like, that's my birthday. I'm like, yeah, I know, Ben.
In the same way that on like Melba's scores, it had people's names on there, and
Yeah.
it's like this idea of writing specifically for that person. David Mescatique, on our very first show, we co-wrote this tune. He wrote the music, and I wrote the lyrics, and this kind of very like almost like a tribute to John Hendricks and
Cool.
the John Hendricks style of lyricism. It's this blues, and whenever he expanded it for the big band for the very first show, he wrote everybody's name,
Cool.
and because he handpicked, like, I want this person on this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful
which is
thing.
Yeah, it is, right? Because it's the ultimate show of like a band leader who like just cares deeply about the people in the band, as opposed to like, oh, these are the instruments I'm writing for, and whoever.
Trombone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your name?
What's your name?
Buddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, not your buddy, pal.
Yeah.
He's like, not your pal, sport. That's a rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, that's amazing that you're doing that. You had the same thing in mind, not only from a, what am I going to write for this person, but this is your birthday, and this is the song from that.
And it's a great tune.
Yeah.
It's sort of a choro tune. It was a cool fit.
Yeah.
And we do it on soprano and clarinet, which is a very unusual combination. I just can't think of a lot of other ensembles that pair soprano and clarinet.
Yeah. When you're working on projects that are specifically, that you think in your mind, like, okay, well, this will be, or I hope this will be an album, do you like to give yourself a certain amount of time in between to kind of, because it's a very long, involved process, or is it just like, nope, if I have the idea, it's burdened upon me that I have to do it?
Yeah. Sometimes deadlines impact it. So with the CMA New Works thing, like, so, okay, I have to spend this money by this day.
Yeah.
But
what a problem to have.
Yeah, well, right. We should all have that problem.
Yeah.
But I would say more often it's scheduling that impacts it, especially if I'm bringing people from out of town. But also the people I work with in town are busy and they tour, and getting Dana and Clark in the same room is not always the easiest thing. With Kurt Elling's schedule for Clark, and Dana has so many different touring commitments, and he's the head of the jazz program at DePaul, and he's highly in demand within the city as well as without.
Right.
So sometimes it takes a lot of planning to get like something like the NonAd thing to happen. I bring Anna Weber in from New York and Marquis in from New York at that time, and so I'll try to have an anchor gig. I think in the case with that record was the Hyde Park Jazz Festival, which has been so generous over the years to feature a lot of my music and to give me these opportunities to present things that need a bigger stage. And I had the funding, so I was just trying to get everybody in town for 5 to 7 days, and to rehearse 2 days, to play gigs for 2 days, and then to record.
Yeah.
And it all has to happen at once, because if it doesn't happen at once, I got to fly people back in. It's more money, it's more time, it's more scheduling. The music's not fresh in everybody's head.
Yeah.
So my ideal is like doing a run of gigs up to a recording.
Yeah.
Within a fairly short time, within a week or two.
Yeah. That sounds very, very conducive to like it's also much more relaxing when you go in the studio, because it's like, all right, we've already done this.
Absolutely. And the music evolves as you play it on the stage. So if I had recorded, with Yes And, I feel like we played 3 concerts that week before we recorded. With the NonAd, I was very happy that happened. We did 2 days of rehearsal, and then we played University of Wisconsin Parkside, which has a beautiful hall, Rita Pickett Hall there, and we played Northern Illinois, where I teach, and then we played the Hyde Park Jazz Festival, because I had to keep the other ones outside of the Chicago area for contractual reasons. So I couldn't book a week in Chicago and then play the Hyde Park Jazz Festival, because it undermines the festival booking, right? So it had to be stuff that was in driving range from Chicago for the festival, yet that was a big enough hall to present a NonAd in. So anyway, so we did those, and 3 performances and then 2 days in the studio. Yeah,
right. Amazing, man. Let me ask you a couple of speed round questions, and then we'll have that lunch we've been talking about. Can you think of a piece of advice that has stuck with you, that you carry with you, just maybe subconsciously, but you can remember back to a mentor, or a colleague saying?
Wow, I'm not very speedy in the speed round, I think.
No, it's fine. It's ironic.
I think I've been the beneficiary of a lot of good advice over time. And sometimes I don't always remember who it comes from. But a lot of it, what I was saying right at the beginning of this, that very basic thing of keep it simple.
Mm.
I violate that all the time, but that's still really good advice that I should follow.
Totally.
You know, you're writing a melody. Do you need that? You know, somebody, one of my composition teachers years ago, you know, just brought up the idea of economy of means in both playing and in writing. And in writing, it's like, well, if you put something out there, and in improvisation, you've committed to that thing, and you have to see it through. Now, in improvisation, you may decide you didn't like it just a second after you put it out.
Yeah.
Tough. It's out.
Right.
And now you have to develop it in some way.
Yeah.
Writing, does the initial idea matter? Not much. A lot of the great classical melodies are really simple initial ideas that, you know, in the hands of a lesser artist wouldn't be anything special, but in the hands of a Beethoven or Ravel are brilliant. So that idea of economy of means, which to me also translates into the yes and thing in a certain way of like whatever is out there now, and you have to follow through with it.
Yeah. I love that. I was trying to think too. I was like, oh, it was at Texas State yesterday when you were telling that kind of young arranger, saxophonist.
Nice piece he wrote.
Yeah, you're like economy of means.
Yeah.
You know, use something. If it's there, use it. All right, here's the hot seat question. You know, we got to get these like warmers in there, so that just like we'll hit a button.
So if
like,
I don't answer, to get a little shocked.
Yeah, right.
Fast enough.
Totally. The hot seat question is best place in Chicago to get a slice.
Oh, you know what, man? I am the worst person to ask this question.
Oh, yeah?
Because I'm not really a Chicago pizza guy. For like the deep dish pizza thing, it's just not my thing.
How about best
More
place?
More Italian pizza. But my favorite current pizza in Chicago is Pizzeria Lobo.
Okay.
In Wicker Park.
Okay.
In Logan Square, actually. I think they're in Logan Square.
What about best place to get a slice in general?
Rome.
Rome. There we go. And easy. He's like, any specific place?
Naples.
Any of them.
Naples.
Any of
Naples.
Them. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anywhere.
Amazing. If there's a record that you would tell everybody to go check out right now, it could be of anything at all. It does not even have to be beholden to the jazz genre. What would it be?
I only get one.
No, you can say as many.
I mean, I mentioned The Prisoner.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a great record, and the dedicate you got to get it on record or on CD so you can read the liner notes because it's worth it.
Yeah.
Talking about how he's, you know, thought about these pieces around Martin Luther King's life. Like, it won't mean the same if you just stream it and you don't know Herbie's thoughts on it. So I think that the free music of Hermeto Pascual, that's one of my favorites ever. Any Hermeto. But that's a really good starting place because it ranges from, there are moments that sound like Duke Ellington. There's like, you know, Afro samba, Brazilian kind of stuff. There's him squeezing pigs to make noise. I mean, it's everything.
Wow.
It's like you get a little taste of Hermeto's entire oeuvre in a way, and beautiful, beautiful writing. Well, Milton Nascimento. I love Courage. That's a great record. But also just Milton's first record with Wayne, I think it's his first record, just called Milton. Okay. With Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock on it. Or Native Dancer, Wayne Shorter with Milton Nascimento. That's like a desert island record for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then the final question is always fun. We all have gigs from hell, just like crazy, funny gig stories where we're like, wow, cannot believe what's going on. And, you know, as we were sitting at Roosevelt Room last night, I was just listening to this wealth of stories that, like, you know, aren't even like negative stories. They're just hilarious stories. Yeah. And, you know, that's why my voice is like a little bit more hoarse today, because I think just like all throughout yesterday, whether it was the Tim Heidecker thing we were watching in the morning where we're just, I'm like crying, and then just through dinner and drinks, you know, it just, I love stories. I love being told stories, and we get to share.
That's one of the great things about being a musician is the passing along the stories part. Exactly. Because you got a lot of waiting time.
Right.
Yeah. So somebody who's a good storyteller goes a long way on the road.
Yeah. So speaking of crazy stories, do you have any crazy gig stories you can think of?
How much time do we have?
As much time as you want.
All right. I think that, like, okay, there's some like personally embarrassing moments of this one probably, but I'll tell it anyway. It's not that bad. I think I can make it, you know, pretty PG.
Perfect.
And family friendly. So
we're not on a network.
Great. So I did this tour when my first record, Rule of Three, came out, and there's a lot of things around that record coming out that it's probably too long to go into here. But we ended up self-releasing because of a sort of an impending tour and some confusion with the record label that was going to put out. It's cool, but it was early. It was before a lot of people were doing that. It was in 2000, 2001. Okay. And so my friend Ted Sirota, great drummer out of Chicago, and Noel Coopersmith is on the record, but Clark did the tour with us, Clark Sommers, who I'm here with this week. And this guy who was a new promoter, he was a German cat who had come to Chicago, fallen in love with the scene, and decided to bring some Chicago bands over to Germany and Austria, sets up this tour. And he's a brand new, like he's done this for one of his friends before, right? Yeah. It's completely punk rock. And it's not like your fancy like Euro Festival tour. Sure. We're playing like squatter houses and stuff like that. And some fancy clubs like Porgy and Bess or whatever. But but a whole variety of places. And he had set up, I want to say that it was like 17 gigs in 19 days. Ranging from Basel, the Bird's Eye in Basel, Switzerland, all the way up to northern Germany and Bremen, to Nickelsdorf in Austria, all over the country, crisscrossing back and forth. And some of it we had sort of a base in the middle, but anyway, we played this gig in Darmstadt, which I think was probably like the second or third gig of the tour. And I have to preface this with we're traveling, so with a bass and drums, right? And a lot of European cars are small. Okay. And we have him as a driver and a friend of his traveling with us to share the driving for some of it. And so his solution, because he's trying to keep this as cheap as possible, is to borrow his friend's dad's milking truck. And I don't mean a milk delivery truck, I mean a milking truck, like a truck that had the apparatus to milk the cows. You drive the truck out to the farm, hook it up to the cow, right? So,
oh my God.
So he had gotten like a bench from somewhere, shoved this bench in the back of the milking truck, taken the milking apparatus out so we could put the bass and drums in. I mean, the bench I don't think was even attached to the truck. Yeah. Right? And it was very, very primitive, beaten up. So we drove this thing all over Germany and Switzerland and Austria for 19 days. And that's probably enough right there. But so the Darmstadt incident, we played this great gig at the Institute of Jazz in Darmstadt. It's fantastic, great club, historic, Steve Lacy, everybody's played there. And people were super cool. And these people in this like anarchist squatter house made us dinner, like some vegan dinners. And it was like a classic experience. And then they drive us out to this castle where we're sleeping. Okay. It's a like old German castle that's been turned into a rave. And there are musicians' quarters in it, and like which consist of like memory foam cushions on the floor, unrolled on the dirty floor. Great. And there's like 3 different levels of dance club, like with EDM music going on, right? And so, okay, I mean, fortunately I brought plugs, so I managed to get some sleep through all the boom, 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 right? Sure. All night. And I got up in the morning before anybody else. I'm like, man, there's showers here. I'm gonna take a shower. Because you never know when your next opportunity on that kind of tour is to take a shower. Like, I'm gonna seize the moment. So the shower's in this room, this big, there's laundry in the room, and there's water on the floor and dryers running. Like, I don't know, but all right. And the shower's these giant glass boxes, like they're 8 feet high and they go all the way down to the ground. And the like shower head is like, you can't even figure out like what this thing is. Like how to turn it. So anyway, get in the shower, take an absolutely freezing cold shower because there's no hot water. And then I turn around to get out of the shower and there's no door handle on the inside. So I'm just alone in this rave castle, locked in the showers, in this disgusting, vile, dirty bathroom, in this giant glass box. And I tried like, I was like, Ted, Clark, give me that. No, nobody's awake yet. And they're like 3 floors over or something. So then like, I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be here all day. Nobody even knows I went to take a shower. Yeah, like, this place is huge. Yeah. And so, stark naked, I climbed over this glass box with like, jagged edges and stuff. Whoa, man. And that's my, I don't know if it's my worst gig story ever, but it's my worst tellable one.
That's that tellable one. Yeah. Amazing. as soon as we get the mic off.
Yeah.
I want to hear all the
Okay.
other ones. But wow, a milk truck and freezing cold shower, just
Yeah.
stark nude, really just painting a picture.
Yeah.
For...
I hope I'm not painting too vivid a picture.
No.
but yeah.
Well, what was the album artist that you said did the Yes and?
Son and Zimmer.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's tell them about like a
Yeah.
silhouette concept.
Yeah.
Amazing. Man, Geof, what an absolute pleasure and a privilege it is
It's
to
really
know
fun.
all of you and to spend such an extended amount of time and for you to believe in the thing that we're doing and come and share in this space. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. And
It's
this
my
has been
pleasure.
such a fun time.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much.